This is the Last Temptation of John podcast, and as you know by now, I am the Apostle John. I want to welcome you to the show. Now, I'm currently reading through the trilogy of books I've written. In today's show, we'll continue with Book 1, and I'll read chapters 19 and 20. Chapter 19 of my diary, I'm calling it affectionately The American Idol. The date is still June 20th, but the events I'm about to relate to you take place once more in a time long past. And so, having just witnessed unwelcome memories from nearly 2,000 years ago, I was ready for a break. Surely Mary won't wait around forever, eh, Peter? I quipped to myself as I remembered what my friend said during my last vision and took another sip of my iced tea. Yes, this was a Long Island iced tea. Well, it seems we were wrong about that, huh? For hell hath no fury like a woman scorned, right? Still sitting on my porch, I snickered to myself with chagrin, for as I pondered the situation I told you about last chapter, it seemed that nobody got what they wanted. Remember, Lazarus never did get Mary. Jesus never accepted Mary's advances. I'm still here rotting in this worn-out husk of a body, and Jesus never came back. For you see, all of our dreams have been dashed. Why do you curse us like this, Lord? And I threw my glass down on the porch, watching it smash into countless pieces, even as the remaining liquid quickly seeped through the floorboards. And then, overwhelmed with shame, I cried, I'm worn out calling for help, God. Will my life never end? Even if I end up in the land of gloom and shadow, even still I will go there if it means I can only escape this so-called life. As if on cue, I noticed the radio playing yet another one of my favorite songs, the Jim Reeves classic, Am I That Easy to Forget? And so I sang along. Guess I could find somebody too, but I don't want no one but you. How could you leave without regret? Am I that easy to forget? I was about to let myself be drawn deeper into the song when we interrupt this broadcast, came the urgent words of the announcer, with a special report about the assassination of UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon. No! I yelled, not again! What about my Phillies game? And I stewed as the special report was delivered. No less than 30 minutes of rigmarole about how, as yet, no one knew who had assassinated Ban Ki-moon, although I had a pretty good idea, and that an emergency meeting of the United Nations had already taken place, and that Ghaz al-Ridwan Mehboo had already been elected as the interim Secretary General, with only the United States, Great Britain, and Russia casting negative votes, which, as you and I know, was only for appearance's sake. After this, there was a short audio clip from Dr. Mehboo's acceptance speech, in which the beloved world leader explained that while his first inclination was to advise he was not worthy of such an honor, in fact he agreed to accept the nomination, at least on a short-term basis, because he realized that the world needed him, and therefore he promised to do his best to lead the planet to prosperity. Now, as odd as this might sound to you, the listener, during the initial newscast I was quite dour, yet while Dr. Mehboo's audio was playing, I actually found myself getting inspired, just a bit, by Dr. Mehboo's passion. It was a contagious sensation, and I couldn't shake it, and soon enough a smile began to form beneath the scraggly curls of my beard. For the more I listened to Ghaz al-Ridwan's smooth voice, the more I realized his voice beckoned to me. And then, as if the shackles of 2,000 years of lethargy were suddenly released, I jumped up and looked to the heavens. Could this really be the time? And I was actually hopeful. And in spite of myself, I began to praise the Lord. When my soul is downcast within me, I remember you. Oh Lord, you have returned to us. You have returned to us in the person of Dr. Mehboo. And while Mabou continued to talk, encouraging the world to unite in brotherly love, my own hopes sprang even higher. Lord, Lord, are you him? And I desperately clutched my radio, hanging on for Dr. Mabou's next words. But then it happened. For as the applause from the crowd became so overwhelming, Mabou himself could no longer be heard. No! I collapsed in despair on my porch. Don't desert me again, Lord! Yet my protests were to no avail. And when the regular newscaster's voice came back over the speaker, I felt as if I was nothing more than a worthless sinner who had yet again been forgotten and abandoned. Pity? I don't want your pity. You can stuff your sorries in a sack, mister. And if there were any last vestiges of hope within me, I quickly beat them down. But then a small, still voice inside me seemed to say, John, John, why do you forsake me? Yet I refused to listen. Instead, I simply reached towards the radio and clicked the dial, turning it off. A lone tear trickled down my cheek, for I resolved to go inside and just get into bed, trying to put an end to another miserable day. As for me, it's always the same. I am scorned and disgraced. Shame has broken my heart and left me helpless. Oh Lord, why do you forsake me so? And I trudged along my porch as I continued complaining. Let the world take care of itself, or let Dr. Mabou do it. He doesn't need me. You don't need me, Lord. Nobody needs me anymore. And with that, I went inside and closed the door. Wow, this has been a bummer of a chapter, huh? Thankfully, it's over. Well, it's chapter 20 in my diary, and the date is 2 days later on June 22nd. I'm calling this chapter A Good Man because I'm going to tell you about a friend of mine. Oh, I know I was pretty sad in that last chapter, and admittedly, I did pout for a couple days. But I kept myself busy, tinkering around the garage, working on my, project. And now, as I told you before, I'm currently living in upstate Pennsylvania in a town called Williamsport, to be exact. Now, if you're wondering what there is to do in Williamsport, let me answer for you. Not much. I migrated here over 50 years ago because I wanted to live in a secluded town where I wouldn't be bothered. And for the most part, that's still the case. The city, if you can call it that, is located in the northern part of Pennsylvania, a little east of Center. And when I moved to Williamsport back in the 1950s, it was still a pretty small town. But since then, it has grown to about 30,000 people or so. Now, most of that's due to an influx of supposedly rehabbing criminals that have been continually shipped here from Philly for the last couple decades. And to encourage Williamsport to accept these fine new citizens, the state paid the city of Williamsport a bunch of money for so-called community projects. It wasn't a fair exchange. Williamsport used to be a decent country village with respectable people, but now I don't even travel much into the city proper anymore because of all the riffraff. Sure, Philadelphia is good for being the home of my Phillies baseball team, and I can never have too many of Gino's cheesesteaks, but would you please keep your criminals there? Hey, fun fact, did you know that in the late 1800s, Williamsport was actually known as the lumber capital of the world? Or that Williamsport once had more millionaires per capita than anywhere in the United States at the time? I doubt you know any of this or even care. In fact, if you've ever heard of Williamsport at all, it's likely because it's the birthplace of Little League baseball, and it's still the home of the Little League World Series. Now, if you know anything about me, you should know by now that I love baseball, and while I never played the game, it didn't exist when I was a boy, for whatever reason, I can't get enough of watching this pastime now. Sure, my favorite team is the Philadelphia Phillies, but being that they are 3+ hours away by car, I rarely get to see their games in person. Now, if I want to see some live ball, I have a couple of options. I can drive into town and watch the local minor league affiliate of the Phillies called the Williamsport Crosscutters, or I can go to any number of local Little League baseball games and see the sport in its purest form. Now, in addition to going to the Little League World Series every August each year, for a long time I also helped as a volunteer assistant coach with some of the local Little Leagues in the 1970s and 80s, usually at the Brandon Park Little League, which was a local community park across the street from my friend Frank Stappa. Yes, I said friend, because believe it or not, I actually did have a few people I considered friends. You know, I enjoyed my time as a baseball coach, and I was a stalwart there for over 2 decades at the Brandon Little League. Unfortunately, in the late 1980s, I started to feel underappreciated by some of the parents, and later on, I started to get questioned as to why an old geezer like me was so interested in helping out with young boys and girls who were not related to me. Eventually, it just wasn't worth the trouble anymore, and I gave up. I mean, gee whiz, it's not like I was recruiting some kid to be my catamite. I simply loved the game of baseball. Is that such a crime? Anyway, let me tell you about my friend Frankie to take my mind off of that baseball fiasco. The shock of black hair ever filled with Brill cream, Frank was a greasy-haired Italian Polak who was one of the few people in the world I've ever met who truly got it. It was Frankie who introduced me to my faithful friends Jim and Jack, Reeves and Daniels, that is, as well as to such beer classics as PBR, Genesee, and Yingling. And it was Frankie who also turned me on to country music. Oh, there were many a night when it was just the two of us putting away a case of beer or a few fifths of whiskey, listening to Jim Reeves, Conway Twitty, or Hank Williams. For you see, Frankie understood that life was pretty much pointless unless you could find some way to enjoy it. Oh, he was quite a character. Frankie was as gregarious as I am quiet, and for over 40 years we made quite a team. Unfortunately for me, Frank passed away back in 2009, and things just haven't been the same for me since he left. For you see, Frank was my last real friend. He knew my secrets, and he took them to the grave. Funny enough, I was there at Frank's funeral mass when his grandson gave what I consider to be the most fitting eulogy of all time. Not only was the talk filled with humorous stories about Frankie's life, but at the very end, right there in a Catholic church, mind you, his grandson cracked open a can of Pabst Blue Ribbon beer and sent Frankie off with a toast of one for the road. You can check it out on YouTube. Search up Frank Stappa beer can eulogy and watch it for yourself. After you see it, you'll realize that's some way to go, huh? I mean, I can't imagine the balls it took for his grandson to stand up in a Catholic church and make a toast with a beer can. I heard after the fact that the priest was none too happy about it. But hey, what are you going to do? And yet, I don't have such a luxury. I'll never get a eulogy like that because I'm still stuck here. Despite the fact that I still enjoy my baseball and my booze and my music, I'd gladly give it all away if I could only die like my friend Frankie. For you see, I'm just so tired of being alive. Can't you understand that? I doubt it. But yet, there's a section of King Solomon's Book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 12 to be specific, which comes close to what I'm feeling. Let me read it for you. The years approach when you will say, I find no pleasure in them, when the sun and the moon and the stars grow dark, when old men rise up at the sound of birds, but all their songs grow faint, when even the grasshopper drags himself along, for desire is no longer stirred. Then shall the dust return to the ground it came from, and the spirit to the God who gave it. But for me, it's all meaningless, meaningless. Everything is meaningless. Now, if you open your Bible and read that book, you'll notice that I did not add that last section about life being meaningless. King Solomon himself wrote those words, and he was supposed to be the wisest man who ever lived, so if you got a problem, take it up with the king. In any case, the point is, his words sure as hell apply to me. But what more can I do? I can't die, and yet I don't want to keep on living. And so I am forced to suffer a meaningless existence, unless I can figure out a way to change my fate. And you see, friends, that's what my little project is all about. Listen, I'd love to finally tell you about something important like my project, but alas, right now I'm supposed to keep talking to you about my revelations. Again. Well, another episode in the books. Hey, if you are enjoying this podcast, would you please give it a high rating on whatever podcast app you're listening on? Would you please share it with a friend so we can help to grow our audience? And of course, make sure you subscribe so you can get notified of new episodes. And also, I recommend you do go to our website, temptationofjohn.com, so you can get a link to every episode of this podcast. Thanks for listening, and let's move on to the next chapter.